Hi, I'm Katherine Hayhoe, a climate scientist and a troll blocker online. Welcome back to Cold Facts Hot Takes, where I take on some of the thousands of troll comments I have received over the years, and believe me, I have a giant folder of them, and separate fact from fiction while having a little fun along the way. Today, I will be talking about the fact that, yes, when it comes to climate change, the science is settled. Now, before we start, let me remind you, there's all kinds of different flavors of climate denial. Some people might say it's not real, or it's not us, or it's not bad, or we can't fix it. And those might look different on the surface, but what they all do is they all delay climate action as long as possible. What else do they have in common? They all try to sound at least a little bit legit, at least a little smart, at least a little bit like the person who's saying it isn't a total idiot, right? Because people don't want to be idiots. They want to be smart. You want to see through things. You want to be canny and clever. So in that department, claims like, well, we don't really know, or we're not sure, or as some politicians like to say, I'm not a scientist. And every time they say that, I'm like, hello, I am. If you call me, I will give you the answer. Few of them do. On the surface, these objections have the appearance of sounding savvy and smart, like, oh, all those people who just ignore the nuance and they ignore the uncertainty, but I am considering all of the nuance and uncertainty, and so I know that science is never settled. I know not to be sure. I know that we need more research. Well, of course we're always learning more. Of course we are. But we've known since the 1800s, that digging up and burning coal back then, and of course, more oil and gas today, and burning it produces carbon dioxide, which is a heat-trapping gas that is building up in the atmosphere, wrapping an extra blanket around the planet, causing it to warm. The first scientist to measure the warming of the planet due to this extra blanket was Guy Callendar in 1937. So sure, there's always more to discover about this complex planet we live on that's as intricate as the human body. But to know that climate is changing, humans are responsible, the impacts are serious, and there are solutions if we act now, that science has been signed, sealed, and delivered for decades, in some cases, centuries. So let's look in detail about some of the objections that I often get. Let's begin with the classic. Men who are not scientists explaining science to women who are. I get a lot of this. Here we have a man saying, science is assumption-based guesswork. An apple falling is real. The guess that gravity is proportional to the mass and inversely proportional to the square of the distance is abstract and subject to constant revision. I don't think they've revised the gravitational constant for a very long time. Maybe since Newton's day? And then he says, so how do you know in science? Rhetorical question, you don't. So what do you see from this post? It sounds really smart. It sounds really educated. It sounds like, well, I understand that this is always being revised, and it references things like gravity and apples, which is the classic story, apocryphal, I believe, of how Newton decided to quantify gravity. But this guy isn't a scientist. It's obvious he isn't a scientist because there are 100% things that you can know. What can you know about gravity? What goes up comes down. That's pretty clear, right? It's like you could say, well, I don't believe in gravity. You step off the cliff, you're going down. What do we know about climate change? We know that climate is changing. Thousands of observations and hundreds of thousands of independent lines of evidence around the whole planet showing us the planet is warming. We know humans are responsible. We've looked at every other cause. They all have an alibi. In fact, according to natural factors, we should be getting cooler right now, not warmer. We know that although there's a couple of impacts that are actually positive, the vast, vast, vast majority are negative. And we know there are solutions that work. So yeah, we do know some things, and what we know is enough to act. All right, moving on to another one. This is just how science works. Oh, sir, yes, please do explain to me how science works. There are no proven facts. There's no proven facts. Wow. Everything is a theory. It's accepted if observations fit the theory, and if they don't match the theory has to change. No scientist is going to say a theory is a fact. Well, guess what? Every single observation fits the theory that climate is changing, humans are responsible, the impacts are serious, and we need to act. Every single observation. So call it whatever you want. I'm totally fine if you want to call it a theory. But if every observation fits the theory, you have to act on it. Next up, we have one that touches on the topic of industry funding. The science is not settled, he says. Your science tries to say there's more than two genders. That science is settled. Well, sir, I don't know if you know much about atmospheric science, but I can promise you the topic of gender has never arisen in the physics of the atmosphere. Weather and climate science is ever changing. Well, we're always learning more, that's true. And most learned people can't predict either next month, let alone 10 years. So what this guy's doing is he's showing that he actually doesn't understand something very important, which is the difference between weather and climate. Weather is what happens today or tomorrow. It could be hot, could be cold, could be wet, could be dry. Weather is like a single tree. Climate is the forest. Climate is the average of all the trees, average of all the days, over at least 2 to 3 decades. So the long-term climate trend is actually quite predictable if you know what's causing it to change. And then over that long-term predictable change, you have superimposed the chaotic variability of weather. So he's totally right. We cannot scientifically predict day-by-day weather more than about 2 weeks in advance. And even those forecasts are pretty sketchy, right? We can do long-term seasonal outlooks, but those long-term seasonal outlooks just show you if it's going to be wetter than average, drier than average, hotter or cooler than average in the next 3 months or 5-6 months. But we absolutely can generate climate projections of what the future will look like. And you know what the number one uncertainty is in climate projections in the future? Us, human choices, because we are the ones driving climate change. So this guy doubled down. He's like, I did physics research once upon a time. Well, sir, I'm actually doing physics research right now. He says, I trained in chemistry with a BA. In both disciplines, we were taught to look for error, especially systemic error. Yeah, I know all about error. I write about it all the time. We were also taught to question anything that people know and follow the money if science looks suspicious. I completely agree. You should definitely follow the money if science looks suspicious. And so, I mentioned before, I got together with a bunch of colleagues and we reanalyzed 38 papers that were published by scientists saying that climate wasn't changing or humans weren't responsible. And in some cases, those scientists had funding from the fossil fuel industry. And guess what? Every single one of those papers had errors in them that if you fix those errors or those false assumptions, brought them right in line with the scientific consensus. So sure, absolutely follow the money. And I'll tell you where the money's going. You know what the annual revenue of fossil fuel companies is? Hundreds of billions of dollars a year. Follow that money. I hope you like this preview of Cold Facts Hot Takes. Up next, I'm responding to a few more of the comments I get, claiming that we don't know what's happening. If you want to hear more, subscribe to Talking Climate on Substack or Patreon to keep watching. Link in the description.